My son's a teacher. You would have to say that to him. But good evening. I'm Bob Faulkner. I'm president of the Community Foundation of Greater Memphis. Welcome back to our offices. It's so exciting to be in a room full of people again. This is the first in-person event that we've done in this building in almost 3 years. So it's great. I mean, as great as technology is, I think we're all a little tired of Zoom. But great to see real people and have real interactions. So the conversation that I think that we're going to have is a lot easier when you can see the people and talk to those people. So tonight's panel is presented by Give 365, an initiative of the Community Foundation of Greater Memphis, which is designed to unite and inform emerging philanthropists to make a collective impact on Greater Memphis. And the way that works is pretty simple. You give $365, $1 a day, to make our community better. And the folks that pay in get together with the other members and decide on an annual basis, what do we want to fund this year? What's the theme of our grant making this year? And then once they've figured out that theme and all these proposals come in, then they get to decide who gets that money. So it really is an incredible program, and one that really invigorates Memphis. You see people who really, I mean, most Memphians really love the city, and it's great to see that show up in terms of wanting to roll up their sleeves and get involved. The themes that Give 365 has chosen over the last 12 or 13 years now have always been provocative, and they're always timely. And that was certainly the case this past year. This past year, the grant's theme was protecting communities, projects and programs that address exposure to the trauma of violence and engage the community in violence reduction efforts. And to advance that theme, the members gave a total of $60,800 to 8 agencies that were addressing those issues. So tonight, the purpose of this is really sort of take a deeper dive into that issue. You're going to hear from esteemed panelists. They are, because I said so. About citywide efforts to support the healing and recovery of those affected by violence and to address the impact of trauma on our community. And unfortunately, if you've been watching the news, it is an incredibly timely issue right now. So there's much here to talk about. To keep us moving through the evening, we not only have a great panel, but we have a superstar to lead us through it. I like the opening line in Pastor Diane Young's bio because I know it to be true. Pastor Young is a wife, mother, grandmother, sister, administrator, talk show co-host, teacher, preacher, evangelist, pastor, and author. There's probably a few more things. I suspect there's a couple other things you're leaving off, but we'll leave it at that. But she's the pastor of the Healing Center for Full Gospel Baptist Church, and one of the leaders of the Wellness and Stress Clinic of Memphis, which offers free primary care, social work and case management, emotional fitness, and legal services primarily in the South Memphis community. She and her husband, Bishop William M. Young, are co-founders of the National Suicide and Black Church Conference. First conference in 2003 had 40 or 50 folks, and now it's up to about 400 folks. So it's become quite a significant effort. Through various initiatives in the last few decades, Pastor Young, I know, has remained committed to helping our community heal. So before I turn things over to her, I just have one more housekeeping item. It's Pastor Young's birthday. So go ahead.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Pastor Young. Happy birthday to you.
Presumably, the rest of the evening will not be as embarrassing as that. So, but with that, I'm going to give you the floor.
Hope everybody can hear me. Can you? All right, I'm a preacher. I know. I am so glad to be here, and thank you so much. This is my first time meeting Bobby. You know everything about me now. I'm gonna find out some things about you. But it is so nice to be here, and this is a great venue. I'm hanging out with great people. I know them, and I still like them. And so we're going to have some great dialogue this afternoon. We're talking about some things that are important to the whole community, and that's protecting the community. And we have those who are doing great work in order to be sure that those things happen. So I want them to take the moment and this one, you want that one?
Yep, try that.
Okay, you sure? Can you hear me now? All right. And so what we want to do, to me, it's a very serious conversation that we're having this afternoon. And like I said, these experts, first I want them to introduce themselves. And we are the home of the Wellness and Stress Clinic of Memphis, where we see anybody that come in free of charge. They can leave their bill folder at home. Please remember that with your agencies to send them over. We're open on Monday afternoons from 5 to 8 p.m. We have legal services. We partner with University of Memphis. They provide social work. Our newest partner, Alliance, they provide right there on the site. We can get people taken in right there for Alliance. So it's a great program. If you want to come by and just get a tour, I'd love to show you around. We also do emotional fitness. Emotional fitness is to keep from saying mental health, because we understand that in our community, the African American community, if you say mental health, you say I'm crazy. And so we have to talk a different kind of language. And so we call it emotional fitness. And then we have Faces of Memphis, which Dr. Stewart would probably take a bow for. She was working with me when we formulated that, a family organization where we train parents who have children with mental, emotional, and behavioral health issues to be helps to other parents. So we've got quite a few things going on, and we'd love for you to come to our campus and visit us anytime. My phone number is in everybody's phone, so you can have it too. So, with no further ado, I'm going to start in order. I'm going to start with Sandy. I'm not going to introduce you at all. I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Sandy Bromley.
All right. Good evening. Can y'all hear me? It's good. Okay. Good. So yes, I'm Sandy Bromley. I am the executive director of the Shelby County Crime Victims and Rape Crisis Center. We are a victim service center within Shelby County government under the Division of Community Services. And I had to say all that part because my boss is here, who is also happens to be Pastor Young's daughter. So it's very awkward. And it's okay. It's fine. No. I got you, boss. Anyway.
That performance looked real good.
So I've been doing victim services for 22 years, which is a really long time. And you're probably wondering how somebody is sane after working with victims of crime for 22 years. And I will tell you that I'm probably not. And I can tell you that I do this work because it's personal. It's personal because I grew up in a violent household, because I come from 3 generations of violent households. And I know that it is possible to break cycles of violence in our homes and in our community. And that's what I believe the work that I do does. I believe in victim services. I believe that victim services is violence prevention work. I believe that because, one, science tells us that you are at more risk of both becoming a victim again after being victimized, and you're also at more risk of offending after you've been a victim. So if we do our job right and we heal people after being victimized, we are preventing violence in our community. So I believe that it's violence prevention work. I also believe that working with victims of crime, or that victims of crime, I should say, needs to be a part of criminal justice reform conversations. It is not a zero-sum game, right? It's not if we treat victims well, we can't treat offenders well. That's not what needs to happen. We need to start talking about how the system is flawed for everybody, and victims have to be at the table in order to have those conversations accurately and appropriately. So is that a good intro?
Excellent.
All right, there you go.
Everybody's pleased with that. Thank you, Sandy. And next we have my newest friend, Dr. Urania. Now, it didn't practice your last
house and mouse.
I'm gonna be calling you Urania.
Hi, everybody. My name's Arena Schaus, and I am an associate professor of clinical mental health counseling at the University of Memphis. I also am the program coordinator for the same program. And in 2017, I founded the Brain Center at the University of Memphis, which is a research and clinical institute that provides mental health counseling specifically focused on the neuroscience of resilience, particularly in the pediatric community. So my work now is largely based at Le Bonheur Children's Hospital. So back in 2021, through generous funding from the Urban Child Institute, I established the first integrated mental health counseling services at Le Bonheur Children's Hospital. So those services are provided strictly in the trauma services division. So any patient that has been a victim of an assault, any kind of violence, but also automobile collisions or any kind of injury, they are eligible now through our services to receive unlimited free mental health counseling services, not only the child, but also the family, because trauma affects everyone. It doesn't just impact your child, it affects you as the caregiver. So since we started in January of 2021, we have provided 2,300 counseling sessions to over 1,500 patients and their family members. So my belief and my goal, just understanding, is getting the message out about the connection between physical injury and mental health distress. They are not separate. It is one thing. So thinking about not separating out mental health from physical health. It is one integrated, our bodies are connected. Our brains are part of our bodies. So understanding that with any kind of injury, there's going to be a mental health repercussion. And having those services available universally for any child and for any parent that is coming into the hospital to receive those services, that mental health needs to be at the forefront, not at the back end, but the forefront of our treatment needs to be integrating mental health care into our physical healthcare system. And that is my biggest passion and advocacy, of the blending of the mental health with the physical health.
Excellent. Wow. We are definitely new friends. Definitely. And now for Dr. Stewart said, you will be sorry for that. Your life is about to change forever. Thank you so much, Dr. Urania. And now one of my old friends. We always end up in the same place. My husband, I told my husband that, I said, Dr. Stewart will be there. He saw you on time. Dr. Arthur Stewart, my friend.
Thank you, Pastor Diane. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Arthur Stewart, and since Bob introduced you in that way, let me introduce myself this way. I'm a native Memphian, born in 38106, raised in 38109. That tells you a lot about how I came into this life and why I'm doing the work that I am doing. I'm on the faculty at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center. I'm an adopted sister of Pastor Diane, which makes me Dorcas's aunt. But I have my real biological niece here as well tonight, Candace Stewart, who is over there. Hey, Candace. So this is truly a family affair. These people who are here on this panel are some of the finest people this town has working on these issues in this city. So it's always an honor to be amongst this crowd and the people that like them that we work with. About 7 years ago, I was asked to come to the university because I have not worked in academia my entire life. I am a community psychiatrist. That's what I trained to do. That's what I have always done. I've worked in large public systems. I've worked in mental health centers. I never wanted to be an academic. I once told the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry that academia, oh, here's my boss walking in. He's the chairman of psychiatry. I told his predecessor that I thought academia was where good people went to die. And so now that I'm back, I realize it's a fertile ground for flourishing and for bringing ideas to the forefront and for doing the kind of creative and innovative things that change requires. Oh, ooh, talk about a save. But 7 years ago when I was invited to come, it was for the sole purpose. I never intended to stay as long as I have. It was for the purpose of making a contribution to my community in the area of working with children who were on a path or at risk of being on a path that would lead them to some kind of out of home, out of community placement. And whether that was the justice system or the child welfare system or any other system, that our children did not need to be out of home, out of community to thrive. And that if they were suffering from some trauma-related issue or had an undiagnosed and untreated mental health problem, or had challenges in their families and communities that they simply could not overcome, that did not mean they should be consigned to the system for their care. And so 7 years ago, I came to the university. We established what we called then the Center for Health and Justice Involved Youth, for the reason that Arena has said, because we're talking about health. We're not talking about legal law enforcement and any of that other stuff. We're talking about kids who are in the midst of developing into adults and whose path along child development requires supportive adults, particular kinds of activities and skills development and socialization that warrants them being able to be thriving, productive adults. And so I came to do that. And 7 years later, we now call it the Center for Youth Advocacy and Wellbeing, because our focus has truly shifted to supporting kids to becoming the best that they can be and working with their families to support them in doing that. We, as Pastor Young said, we helped. I will not take credit for it because there were a lot of people there, including you and Bishop. We helped to create the FACES program, which now trains family support specialists. So if anybody in the audience knows families who have navigated with their kids through the system and they want to become partners in the system, working, employed, workforce development kinds of things, with a living wage and a pathway to other things, career opportunities. That's where we do that family support training. And we host 5 programs at my center, ranging in things from gang prevention and intervention, mental health, trauma, integrated care, pediatric and behavioral health care, and a host of other things. On the side, I also do some work around COVID and working to improve vaccination rates in underserved communities and some other things, and whatever else my boss, the chairman of the department, tells me.
Dr. Stewart, we love you so much. We really want her to stay there too. Thank you, Dr. Stewart. He wants you to. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Stewart. Now we're going to hear from not an old, he's an old friend now. You become an old friend, so you just might as well sign on the line. Charlie Caswell, who's doing some great work in Fraser and out in that area, and has grown and appreciate you. He's a minister as well. So if you would tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, so we can
All right.
ask you questions too.
I'm just here because they needed a male on the panel. But I say this, but God, that I am here. When I think about how I got here, and as again, someone who born here in the city of Memphis, in the Dixon Home projects in North Memphis, at a time when crack cocaine came on the scene heavily, big family, 17 brothers and sisters. And sadly, I thought that, like many of my friends, we weren't going to make it out of that community alive or without being in jail. So to sit here today with these powerful women who doing great work in this city, and especially I got to say I call them my mother, someone who mentored me to really life. She don't know this. We spent 9 months in Leadership Memphis together, American Leadership Forum. So I was just doing this work out of my passion of fight, flight, and freeze of the trauma that I experienced growing up in Dixon Home, witnessing that 14 years old, one of my friends killing another friend, and 15 sending another friend shot in the head in front of us. And so that flight place that I was in, just doing the work, Dr. Stewart met me around 2016 in that program and said, Charlie, you're doing the work, but here go the evidence base behind that work. And she introduced me to adverse childhood experiences. And that changed my life. I changed my marriage. I can say it saved my marriage, because I went home from being that person who, and my wife will say, to me, hey, baby, you're going to wash the dishes tonight. I get mad and bust a hole in the wall because it was a time that I got whooped with a extension cord for not washing dishes. So I seen my mother in that trauma than I did with the wife that I had. And so in that beginning legacy of Legends Community Development Corporation, where I served up until last week as the executive director, I'm now the chairman of the board, because I currently just recently got elected in District 6 as the county commissioner. And truly, I got to say, I owe it to all of them. Dr. Diane Young, who opened up her doors when we began to do this work and showed us, again, you don't have people a lot of times that willing to just freely show you the work that's how it should be done. And by that partnership, we went down and partnered to start a clinic inside of Impact Church, where we just recently been, over the last 3 years, been doing the work with Labana that's providing the mental health and the physical health because of the partnership with University of Tennessee, where Labana has showed us the data that they have seen 70% more children in Fraser in the neighborhood than the 30% that was showing up at the medical district in there because of that coming into the community. Y'all can give that a hand. And so again, I'm just honored to be here. Looking forward to my new role upstream, that we can really push policy. We've been able to do that. The time that I've been serving as executive director, we went and fought around the schools, become trauma informed. We've seen that happen at a state level. I went back in 2020 with a group of kids that I trained at MLK High School, Georgia Hill Middle School. We advocated and got House Bill 2588 passed. So now anyone that get a divorce in the state of Tennessee got to go through 30 minutes of adverse childhood experience training before the judge signs off on that divorce. And I can say the power to that is a family I just spoke with last week said now they're going through counseling after going through that training to say they want to fix their marriage because they didn't want the ripple effect that happened to them. So thank you.
You're not just here to be the man on the panel. I tell you, it's one thing to hear a sermon, but it's better to see one. And today we are seeing that sermon in you, Charlie Caswell. Thank you and congratulations on what you do.
I'm used to it since I got a majority of women on the county commission.
So you're practicing on us.
Whatever y'all say.
Good job, good job. My husband learned that too. So I think you kind of marched us into where I want us to really start talking, because one of the problems that we face in this community is there's so much trauma and nobody knows what's happening. They're not informed about it. So I want to ask this panel, and I'm not going to ask who, well, maybe I should. Since you started this conversation off, Charlie Caswell, I'm going to ask you, what is, and I know you've been working with this, what is a trauma-informed community?
Yeah, again, I would say a trauma-informed community is a community that's knowledgeable of what trauma is. When we talk about trauma, and for me, again, going back to the root cause of it, many times when we see domestic violence and we see the things that are happening in our community, how adults are acting out, and many times it's because of what happened to them. And so we have so sadly many times said, what's wrong with these individuals without addressing the root of what happened to them. We know what happened when we look historically at the communities that many of our families come out of. I serve on the Shelby County Board of Health and with Dr. Taylor, and we looked at a lot of it. As she said, the data show, you can look at the data and pretty much tell what is going to come out of many of these zip codes because of the ripple of what has happened. And so a trauma-informed community is one that, again, is knowledgeable of trauma and then the impact of doing something about it. So.
Sandy, could you jump in there? Because that's part of your story as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things I always wished is that if I had a magic wand, I could just go around and heal trauma, right? Just very quickly heal trauma, that we don't have to go through that crazy $650 an hour psychiatrist or anything like that, right? And I used to say that early on in my career, and then I realized, you know what? It actually is. Bear with me here. It's actually not that hard to heal trauma, right? It's actually not that much work. The work that we do explaining how our brains react to trauma, explaining why we might have reacted the way when somebody asked us to do the dishes, the work you do just in simple education can go a long way towards healing. And I think we often forget when we talk about adverse childhood experiences or adverse community environments, we forget the resilience part. We forget the fact that it's not that hard to heal. And we have to start making that healing normalized. I think that's the next piece that we haven't really talked about. And so that's one of the things that my agency is doing now. We're no longer waiting for people to come in our doors to seek trauma counseling because, as you mentioned, people don't want to do counseling because counseling means something, right? Instead, we're going to go out there and do workshops. And, we're going to talk about, somebody mentioned well-being, right? I think that was you, Dr. Stewart. Let's talk about resilience and well-being. Let's stop talking about the trauma piece and stopping there. It's important to learn the trauma piece and how it impacts us, but we have to take that next step. And so I think being a trauma-informed community is also being a resilience-informed community as well.
Dr. Stewart?
Well, I think in addition to what Charlie and Sandy have already said, I will take a page out of my son Charlie's book and say a trauma-informed community really understands the message behind it is not what's wrong with you, it is what has happened to you.
That's right.
And that applies whether you're a child or an adult manifesting the behaviors that is what we see. That child acting out in class that gets suspended, expelled, taken out of school for 360 days. That's a behavioral manifestation of something that is much deeper and going on in that child's life. So a trauma-informed community understands that. That's the awareness that Charlie was talking about. A trauma-informed community knows that words matter. Every time we call a child anything other than child, youth, adolescent, young person, somebody under the age of 21 or 18, every time we do that, we put a pin in their brain that says, that's who I am, that's what I'm expected to be, and that's how I'm going to behave. In this morning's news about the unfortunate shootings in your neighborhood, Charlie, the words of the person reporting the story included, and 2 juveniles were taken to the hospital. We don't know yet if they were part of something that resulted in this crime or victims of the crime, but already they carry the label juvenile. If you don't get up in the morning saying, my juvenile, where are you going today? I don't think we ought to say it to anybody's child. I can't change juvenile justice system. I can't change all of those other manifestations of words that are connected with juvenile. But when it comes to the person, that child, I think we ought to all be committed to changing those words because words matter. And then finally, I think a trauma-informed community is filled with adults who understand that we are the protective factors in the lives of these children. that we are that protective cover that ought to be thrown over them when they are thrust into these traumatic experiences at home, when they have to walk through gang-ridden communities to get to school to try to learn, when they are doing their best to work with Reverend Caswell in one of his many programs that are pro-social and promote positive outcomes for kids, that we ought to understand that our job is to be the protective factor for those kids. Wherever they are, they belong to us. Whoever they are biologically related to, they belong to us. And we have to accept that responsibility. And then finally, if you are a visual person, I want you to Google ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and find the image of the tree. The branches of the tree above ground represent all of the components that we recognize as adverse childhood experiences. What we sometimes miss is that root underground, where all of the reasons, all of those things that are going on upstream that children are not prepared to deal with, that they don't understand how to handle, that we are supposed to work on resolving for them. Understand that image and you understand what a trauma-informed community ought to be.
Next time, I'll start with Dr. Stewart.
Irena.
So one of the things that I think is most important is just access to care. When you think about having, when you think about having a trauma-informed community, you think about having everyone have the same access to care. And when you think about mental health care, how difficult is it to get in to see a psychiatrist, to see a counselor, to see a psychologist? We are in a crisis, not only in this nation, but worldwide in terms of mental health. And how do you get services provided to your child when they're in the time of most critical need? This isn't being done universally in schools. This isn't being done universally in pediatricians' offices. This isn't being done universally in hospitals. This is still being done as needed in a crisis situation, and that has to change. What has to change is access to care, early intervention and access to care, early screening, intervention, identification, and providing care. And I see it at Le Bonheur in the work that we do, providing universal standard of care, creating a new standard of care so that every child that's coming in, that's in our division, is receiving the same service. And a lot of times people are so embarrassed, right? They're embarrassed to say that they have struggled with mental health or that they've had intrusive thoughts. There needs to be a place that we can go to receive those services, and hospitals and schools and agencies need to be those places that are providing those access to care. So a trauma-informed community means having inclusivity and having the ability for every child and every family to receive those services, not when they're most critically needed, but previous to. Because, and I've said this to Dr. Stewart, and I said this at our lunch a few weeks ago, when they reach me and when a child has come in and they've been shot, someone, somewhere, everything else has failed, right? It's too late at that point to prevent the shooting, but we have the ability to change their trajectory once we meet with them. So the idea is providing those early services that can intervene prior to the time when we see them after the incident has occurred.
If I was in church, I'd say, can we get an amen right there?
Amen.
This was a question that was in my heart. And so I'm going to ask it, so it may catch you all off guard, but it's there. How are we doing as a community, as getting this community trauma informed? But Caswell, I'm reaching for it. Let me have this one.
Yeah, terrible. We doing some things right, but and we got a lot more to do. But I think that we haven't not. I'll put it this way. When we look at what happened in Flint, Michigan with the lead in the water, how we responded when we knew the impact of what high doses of lead can do to the families there, we reacted. But ACEs and trauma, we don't know how unless we ask the question. And I feel like because many are not asking the questions, we don't have it in pretty much every perspective of our communities. Churches are not really trauma informed as they should. Some are, but I think that we can do more to make people better educated around ACEs and trauma, that we can then begin to really address it. But I think overall, we're not good. We're not good.
Very good answer. And I was thinking, when you said something about churches, I was thinking about, I see Pastor Kirkwood here, and I was thinking that the churches have to be involved in this as well, because we're known for having a church on every corner.
Yeah.
So we've got to pull that faith community in as well. Sandy?
Can I just add this? I think goes a little bit back to somebody said this already, but really about shifting narrative and the word. You said words matter, right? We have to shift our narrative in this community away from the horribleness. Yes, there's a lot going on. Yes, we have very high rates of violence in our community. Yes, we also have very high rates of poverty, right? Like, we have a lot to deal with. And yet that's all we talk about. And so we're not shifting the narrative around what's possible. And what's possible is really hope, right? And if we lost hope, we've lost everything. And so we've got to start shifting that narrative. We also have to start shifting the narrative around responsibility. And this goes back to what Dr. Stewart said earlier about the use of the word juvenile, but also just responsibility of our criminal justice system. We all need to do better. Our system needs to do better by our people and for our people. And so we have to start shifting that narrative as well, right? These are not bad people. They're not bad parents who didn't have control over their kids, and yet that's the language that continues to come out. And so if we start shifting and we really start becoming trauma informed, I think what you would start to see is the idea that people might come for services. There may be an increase in access because parents aren't thinking, oh, I'm bad and I've raised a bad kid and I just want to keep that behind closed doors and not talk about it, right? So I really do think we have to start just making, every time we hear if it bleeds, it leads on the news and everything else, like, we've got to start shifting that. Every conversation, every dinner party you're at, everything we got to get away from the horribleness.
Now, that is incredible. Dr. Stewart, I know you can't hold it. Go right ahead.
I can't.
I know.
You know, you saw it. You saw me leaning because there are pockets of optimism. I think. I know for me, everybody who knows me knows that if you stay in conversation with me long enough, we're gonna get around to talking about kids and what we are not doing well by them. I had yesterday, I had a conversation with a family member who began quoting ACE's language to me. She's never been in a session where I've done training. I obviously have done it enough in common conversation about events in town that it began to sort of resonate with her. And I sat back and said, oh my God, it made a difference. You heard me. And I think we just have to do what Brian Stevenson talks about. We got to remain proximate to this issue and not run away from it. Mm-hmm. We have to, and I think you said it so well, Sandy, we have to understand that when the automatic defense mechanism psychologically is when I feel helpless, I want to shift whatever's bothering me to somebody else because I can't deal with it. And that's what we have done with this whole issue. These are not bad kids. The people that we are talking about, whether they are children or adults who are experiencing this aftermath of the impact of this trauma, are not bad people. It is not what is wrong with them. It is what has happened to them. And the more we begin to shift that narrative into our conversation, I think, Sandy, you're absolutely right. The more we will begin to both be upstream of these issues and really be able to work in a manner that is consistent with a positive outcome upstream of preventing some of this stuff. These are not the most difficult things that we will deal with in life. How to become trauma informed, what to do as a trauma informed community to support and protect our children, how to reform, whether it's the justice system, the educational system, or other systems, how to reform. These are not unsolvable issues, you know, whether it's the church or the school or the community organization or legislative body or university. We have the capacity to do this stuff. We got to have the will to do it.
You're right. You look like you want to jump in there too.
So I think a big part too is awareness and being able to have data and have information to share, because with data and with information comes policy change, because the data is the power. And one of the things that we've done when we first created our services at Le Bonheur, we, in our first 600 patients, we looked at the data in terms of acute stress. Now, for anybody who knows what acute stress is, it's the reaction that you have immediately following any kind of traumatic experience that you've had. So it could be just hypervigilance, it could be distressing memories. So we looked at, is this a common theme in the patients that we're seeing at Le Bonheur? And what we found was that in the first 617 patients we treated, we found that 65% of the kids met the criteria for acute stress disorder, which is the pre-diagnosis to PTSD. So if you know that 65% of the children that are coming in are experiencing essentially PTSD, what does that mean? It means that they need services. It means that they need intervention. And I think that we are doing great in terms of trying to provide those interventions, but calling awareness to these numbers and showing that, hey, this is what needs to be done. This is how it can be done. And these services can be provided, because people need services in a time of critical need. And just vocalizing and calling attention to the fact that we have the data to show that this is a critical need and we can provide those services in our spaces to meet that need.
So what are our challenges?
Well, I think the upstream, the policies, when you think about the people who have the capacity to change laws, to put things on paper, and then give the ignition or the enlightenment to the community that this is an issue that we need to be addressed. I often say this when the news sadly comes to us after a child shot or killed in our community, that there was an epidemic before the pandemic. And the thing is that we're going into a new pandemic of mental illness, because you had that complex trauma of the childhood, the trauma of now being in that trauma, not going, talking to nobody, getting it out. And so we don't know what to do. I think so we got to get people in legislative and in those capacities to understand this, to make the investments towards this, to address this. I mean, I've been hearing it for years when we talk about addressing violent crime as a public health issue. It is, because again, many times my friends will say to me, Chuck, you remember we did all of this after Sid got killed or whatever? I didn't remember it. And so when I went to school, all I can remember many times for years was the teacher saying, where was your number 2 pencil? I wasn't even focusing on education or academic, because all I could see was a body that laid there in front of me. And so I think that we as a community have to understand, when just like I got called at 4:00 this morning for the 7 people shot right up the street from my house, we're gonna go right back to doing things the same way tomorrow with nothing addressed in our community. You know, we got to have it where the policies say that we need mobile units. If we got to have them out there with psychiatrists, with therapists, somebody that these individuals can talk to when they go to school today. They should be talking to some counselors, not just expected to do reading, writing, and arithmetic with all of this going on in their community. So,
Yes. And to piggyback on what Reverend Caswell is saying, in order for what Arena says, which is we need to have more services available and easily accessible. And in the moment of crisis, we definitely need people. That means that the politicians, elected officials, people who legislate and fund services need to understand we've got to have a workforce to do that. And that means we got to start early, getting young people interested in being part of the behavioral health professional community. And everybody doesn't have to be a psychiatrist, while I think they should. Everybody doesn't have to be a psychiatrist, but we need counselors, we need therapists, we need psychologists, social workers, marriage and family counselors. We need a host of people to run the gamut of services, because saying that people need service and ought to have access to it means nothing if there is no one there to provide the service. And then my number 3 pet peeve is the fact that even when we have people willing to provide the service, we aren't willing to compensate them for doing that.
Yes. Yes.
This is hard work.
Yes.
Working in the area of trauma is some of the hardest work. It's not procedural, so it's not like surgery and all of that stuff. It is some of the most difficult work. You are absorbing the pain and suffering of other people, and still having to help them figure out how to deal with it. That ain't easy.
Yes.
And it costs for us to train people, and it costs for us to have to keep training new people to replace the ones who are burned out.
Yes. Yes.
The insurance companies, the payment folks, Medicaid, everybody needs to learn the lesson that we either pay now and do something meaningful and long-term and sustainable, or we just gonna keep paying. The amount of money it takes to keep a kid in detention in a residential placement or in a long-term justice-involved community, the amount of money it costs is exorbitant, when we could pay $70,000 to keep a kid in a community with wraparound services being provided, with absolute essential services in the school, in the home, in the community, lots of pro-social activities, and a host of adults who will be protective in their lives. Those things are much cheaper than housing that child. Arena did her study on the kids who come into the trauma unit. Our study was on the kids who were detained for a single year in our own juvenile detention facility. 75% of those kids had an undiagnosed mental health problem that we could tell from the record. We didn't see them, we saw it in their record. All of the risk factors, all of the real positive indicators that if someone had seen this earlier and done something about it, that's a child who may not have even seen the inside of the detention center. 35% had some kind of learning disability. Maybe another 35 had ADHD that was indicated in the record, which means a lot weren't caught, because that's one of the few things that people don't do a lot of diagnosing on when you go into the juvenile detention center. And if it wasn't in their record when they came in, nobody there was gonna evaluate them for that. So these are the mountains of issues that are faced by people. And this is just in the youth system. I'm not even gonna talk to you about what we find in the adult system by way of trauma, lifelong trauma that is perpetuated and persistent, the kinds of mental health unmet needs that they have, the issues around social understanding of and ethical behavior, right, wrong, productive citizen kind of stuff. I'm not even going to try to talk about that stuff, because it's just magnified as people get older. I'm sorry, I'm out of my lane, Pastor. I'm sorry. I'm reaching into preaching. I'm sorry.
I think one of the things that's so critically important is being able to get policy and reimbursements for mental health. So one of the things that's frustrating for me is something that's called EPSDG screening. Well, it's a state of Tennessee, well, it's actually a national policy, which stands for Early Periodic Diagnosis and Treatment. And what it does is it provides coverage for any child to get a mental health screen. And it's only in pediatricians' offices and schools, not in hospitals. So in a hospital, you can't get a person to have universal mental health care or coverage unless you have one person, one physician that refers that mental health screen. So it's not universal. It's like if I were to see someone and I were to go ahead and make that referral, but maybe you wouldn't. There's nothing that's universal or equal about that. And that's something that has to change. That access to care and that ability for access to care, even if we have the people to provide those services. And one of the things that we're doing at the University of Memphis in our program is we train all of our interns to work in integrated behavioral health. Our students that come through the Brain Center program at Le Bonheur have done over 2,000 hours of clinical work at the hospital in some capacity, but they can't get a job because they can't get reimbursed and those jobs can't be sustainable. So it's this kind of chicken and the egg, what comes first? No one's going to hire a person if they can't be able to bill for those hours and get that reimbursed. So much policy is involved that inhibits the ability to provide these services in our community that is universal.
Challenges. Come on, Sandy.
Can I
Jump in
add-
there.
okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I will just state a fact. I'm not complaining about this, but my victim advocates who often have master's degrees are making $38,000 a year, hearing that trauma all day, every day. So when you said about, salaries, that's my daily battle. And they burn out, and I'm trying to rehire them. And I mean, it's not about her. Commissioner. So one of the things that I want to just sort of talk a little bit about is the importance of healing. And one of the major steps towards healing for all victims of crime, and it's actually one of the major factors of them getting to healing, is validation, is acknowledging what happened to them, believing them, right? So validation is really important. And when you go back to Dr. Stewart talked about the ACEs trees, that's twofold. It's the adverse childhood experiences on the top and the adverse community environments on the bottom. And the adverse community environments involve things like racism and poverty and other forms of oppression. And until our community validates the harm that we have perpetuated against others, the significant generational trauma of racism in our society, until we validate that, how can we expect people to heal? We have to validate that. And so if we can't, anyway, so what the hell are we doing if we're not starting with that? Right? Well, I think she said, well.
Can we say amen after she said hell?
Yeah. There is a hell, yeah.
Amen.
I think it's all been said well. I want to be sure that the audience get an opportunity to get involved. So if it's okay that I take the liberty to ask if there are some questions or some comments that you would like to make, I want to give you that opportunity now. There you go. Come on with it.
I have it on good authority that this community is about to start changing the way it decides who goes into its jail and who doesn't. And so people show up at our jail because there's a lot of evidence that they have done something very bad. People show up to our jail because they've been adjacent to something very bad. People show up to our jail because of mental health crisis, homelessness, minor things, major things. We talk about that in terms of risk. And Dr. Stewart, I'm on a mission myself to change that from risk to need, because no matter what you're charged with doing and why you show up at the front door of our jail, it's usually about what you need, not what the risk is to this community. So I would like to hear from as many of you as can contribute, what you would say to a team of people who are rethinking how we determine how we use our jail for adults.
Oh my God. So I say I'm not going to talk about adults and you ask a question about adults. Thanks, Josh. Well, I'll lead off because I have to give you kudos for being part of the change, being consistent. consistent in the mission of change always gets my attention and support. So what I would say to a team of people looking at how can we do it differently is I would say, no matter what the crime, no matter what the charge, no matter any of that, one of the things that has to be done at the moment of entry, if they must come in at the moment of entry, you have to do some type of assessment for that need. And whether that's a health need or behavioral health and mental health need, a social, emotional, family kind of need, we need to know more about people who enter that system than we currently do. We generally find out about your mental health need when you start acting out with a mental health need. Now, seems to me we ought to be able to find that out sooner. If we, and I'm not making excuses when I talk about trauma, whether it's in children or adults. I realize that behavior has consequences. Criminal behavior has consequences. My job, my role in the system is not to be legal or law enforcement. My job is to try to remain objective and focused on just what you said. What do they need that they didn't get that resulted in this calamity befalling them? And so we got to find out more about what people need. We got to address that need in some way. And people have a right to health and mental health services, no matter what their level of incarceration is. And wherever possible, we have got to understand that people will ultimately leave that situation and return somewhere. And we better be about the business of helping them be better when they leave, or better off when they leave than they were when they entered. And that means a lot more of an investment in the kinds of things that we've been talking about. Those kinds of services, those kinds of connections in the community, that protection for people who are vulnerable. And, you know, my colleagues who work with adults in correctional settings tell me that they can do certain things and they can't do other things that they know to be good practice because of the policy, because of the practice, because of the regulation. These are changeable things. We've got committed legislative officials who understand this stuff, who can help us make the case with their colleagues. And we gotta get better at advocating for what we know is needed for the people that need it. So
I think I will just add to that something, not even add because I can't add to Dr. Stewart. And that is to answer back to your original question. And that is, I think we have to start using science to assess safety risk for the community and for victims. And I think that's the other thing we often leave, we always leave out victim input into bail and bond decisions up until hopefully soon that'll be different. And we've got to start really getting the victim's voice in the process, because again, it's not a zero-sum game. Victims don't often want people to be locked up necessarily, right? That's not necessarily their number one goal either. And so we just have to start doing proper assessments around risk to community or safety to the community and safety for that particular victim as well.
Yeah, Josh, if I was to speak to that too, I'm gonna come from the community perspective in what they're gonna return back to where the need that ended up in there. I said this to U.S. Attorney Joseph Murphy. We was talking about, he said, Charlie, many times we let them back out. I said, but you let them back out to a toxic environment. It's like taking a tree out of an environment that was dying, put them in another environment with no help, and then put them right back into an environment that's dying. We have to do better in our communities, again, around trauma-informed community, but creating safe, healthy, and nurturing environments that will hopefully mitigate the need for them to do the crime that end them up in there in the first place. So I just wanted to say that, because yes, it is a need, but it was something that was not offered in that community or that environment in which they came out of that led to some of the behavior in which get them into that system.
My only comment would be to really focus on the mental health evaluation in the screening process, because if some event, mental health related, precipitated the onset of whatever caused them to wind up, in the situation that they're in, if that's not handled, nothing else will be. So being able to identify it and provide, the right medication or the right intervention, that's really such a key critical part of that process. And it prevents future crimes from happening.
And just one thing, you reminded me when you said mental health again. Shelby County is a stepping up community across the nation. Communities where they saw an increase in the amount of mental health need in their jails and prisons joined a national effort. We joined this about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe more years ago, and really have not taken full advantage of what it has to offer in the way of model programs, innovative funding strategies, and creative collaborations between law enforcement and community. That would be the other thing I would say to that team. Be a real stepping up community.
And if I could jump in there and just say one thing, I would say it. I know I'm not on the panel, but I would. I would say that we need to do more prevention versus intervention. We always find ourselves doing intervention because we didn't do the work on the front end. And I think that's what this panel is trying to say. We got to do the work on the front end, because if we wait on the back end, Josh, we're going to have adults getting out and going back and being that same dead tree.
Yeah.
So the question I have is, first of all, I'm intrigued by this whole conversation, but the question I have is, how do we, I'm a former teacher. How do we want to
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry, people on Facebook. So how do we disrupt the system? Because that's really, when I'm listening to you talk about prevention, I'm listening to you talk about policy upstream and all that. The reality is that there are people who make lots of money off of the backs of the people who are incarcerated in our jails. They make money off of the food, the laundry services, the clothes, the uniform, all of those things. So when you're talking about disrupting the system, you're literally digging into the pockets of some of the wealthiest people who fund the community foundation, right? Like this is they give their 10% to these organizations and say, okay, I'm doing my duty. But we really do need to disrupt the system. We really do need to flip it so that we are not supporting the enslavement, the modern day enslavement of Black men and women and other people of color who are incarcerated, who are the cash cows of these companies. And that's the piece that I'm still stuck with that, because I don't see a way out from that. With the policy, I don't see, the prevention. We need the people who are making the money off of these policy, off of these prisoners and other people, to be at this table having this conversation, because we need their buy-in. We need their brains to switch. And so how do we do that?
We bring them to the table.
Yeah.
Exactly what you described. We bring them to the table and we have a face off with them based on how can we stop playing games and let's get some real services to these people.
So who will do that? Okay, so now
I hear you.
So who's going to do it?
So I say, when you talk about from the policy standpoint, when we got to understand where we invest in our dollars, first of all, to lock them up. So when I say that we can do it policy-wise, is that if we're investing more into the community to mitigate these things beforehand, they don't end up in that jail system. So what that looks like is, and we understand it, in the state of Tennessee, we are a state, and again, this red state, where 90% of the beds have to be filled, or we pay the prison system for them to be locked up. So again, it's laws at the state level that they're not going to change if they continue to see us. So in this county, we're going to have to do something different, because this is where we know they're getting their people from. So for me, it is to make those investments into the community, into people like 901, Hill 901, who have services in the community that can help that person stay out of that system. We've seen it. I know Pastor Kirkwood just walked out of here. He was our former colonel. We were seeing 750 kids every year in Austin Peay Station go to jail 2010 up to 2016. When after I got this ACES training, went back and sat with him for an hour and a half in this office, we went from 700 plus kids down to 200 and some kids, 2018, 2019, right right before the pandemic. So we saw a 70% drop in youth that were going actually for the top 10 incidents to jail in our community because we began the Fraser Athletic League. We began to work together as churches and community leaders to do something different. So, I mean, again, that's something that can be done. That may not get all the way to where you're going, but that's something.
And those,
We hear you now.
I was just say the people that are working at the prisons, they can come work for me, right? So, I mean, the people that are, you know, the food and the laundry and all that stuff, we need to start talking about where we're putting our money as a society, right? So where our county commission's putting their money. And
I'm losing.
Haven't really been sworn in yet. Haven't been sworn in yet.
but why do we have, you know, X percent of the money going to corrections as opposed to going to violence prevention work, right? I've got 3 people doing violence prevention work in Shelby County. That's it. And so how can we, you know, what are we really talking about if we're not putting the money where the prevention is at the.
Prevention versus intervention.
Yes.
Well, and I think
At the end of the day, we're doing intervention and not prevention. Because when we intervene, we're paying the price. Dr. Stewart said, we pay when we do not do the work, put the work in, and put the money where it should go. The money is going to places to take care of things when we're intervening.
Yeah.
But what if we prevent this and they don't get in the system, they do what you did, Pastor Casper?
And I think shifting dollars. So the largest provider of mental health services, does anybody know what it is? Right, in the US? Yeah, right? So it's the prison system. However, how much mental health services are actually being provided? So thinking about it that way, and I think a lot of this came about, you know, with deinstitutionalization and, you know, they were providing more of community-based mental health services, but the communities aren't actually getting the dollars to provide those services. So really, it's about shifting the way that we approach mental health treatment and not shifting it to the prison system. It's bringing it back to the community. So that's a big part.
And I will round out the panel comments by saying what you have heard described in a variety of ways in response to that question is we got to stop the pipeline in because money is made because people are there. The more we can reduce the population of people there, the more likely it is that people who need that population to make money go find it somewhere else. Now, that means we got to be as nimble as they are. But we are a creative community. We're where Isaac Hayes wrote. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's a great point, shifting dollars. Sandy, I want to go back to something you said about shifting the narrative. So how do we shift the narrative? Because I think it's really important, and I was so glad that you touched on that. How do we shift the narrative while still maintaining a certain level of awareness, right? Like we don't want to become so focused on, you know, one area without focusing on the areas where we still need to address it, like some of the violence and the crime. But I agree with you, but I'm just curious in terms of how do we do that and still, you know, have that balance?
Yeah, how do we not bleed into toxic positivity? Which is a real thing. My family has it. Yeah, it's hard. So we have to say, yeah, this sucks. What happened to you sucks, right? We have to do that validation piece first. And if we don't do that, like I said earlier, nothing else matters, right? So we've got to do the validation. We have to acknowledge that there's harm and that people have experienced harm. We have to hold offenders accountable for that harm compassionately, but we still have to hold them accountable for that harm. So all of that does still need to happen. And then we say it's possible to heal. It's possible to heal, and I know I'm on the panel with doctors, and they took a lot of time and money to get their fancy degrees. And it's not that hard, right? It's not that hard to heal our brains. Our brains have amazing capacity to lay down new neural pathways. Like we have the capacity to heal and to heal pretty quickly once we realize what's wrong with us. Yeah. And so, yeah. What happened? Well, sorry. What happened to us? And then that's why our brain is acting the way it's acting. Yes. And so I really think it's around one, acknowledging the bad stuff. I'm not saying we don't acknowledge it and just push it under the rug, but that the next step is, and here's what's possible. Healing is possible. A safe community is possible. Good schools are possible, right? Like all of those things are possible here because look how awesome the people are that are here right now. It's possible. We've got to remember that. Yes.
Hello, my name is Taniki Cecily, and the people in this room are not who I'm targeting per se. And I want to go back to Sandy's comment about generational racism. Racism is huge, not just, when it comes to funding, when it comes to how a person is perceived when they're a victim or when they are in a traumatic situation at the hospital or when they need an advocate. Racism. How do we get to the people and even our white community, not the people who are here in this helping us here. But so make sure okay. So how do we get to healing? How do we change their narrative, if it can be? How does our white community influence other whites in our community? So it may be a little deeper. It's a little deep. It's a whole lot deep. And it's so much only African Americans, Blacks can do. Just because of the way generationally things have happened, there is a system, and I am a believer, and I believe things can change. They don't have to stay the same. How do we bring in more of the white community who has the money, the corporations who make the decisions, can see that racism has had an impact like none other?
Yeah. So I'm just going to speak for Sandy Bromley and not anybody else or the white community, because I don't know that I would be a good representative. We suck. Okay, we suck as white people. And I think that's why I brought it. That's why I'm often the person in the room who brings it up, recognizing that I sit in a position of privilege. So let me start with that. And there's a reason why I said that this evening. It's important for me to bring it up as much as I can. What happens from there is a whole different story. It's important for me to bring it up, and it's important for me to bring other people to the front of the room who aren't me. That's why we contract with Heal 901. That's why we have, I'm not usually the one in the front of the room. You probably have never seen me before or heard my name, because I don't need to be the one in the front of the room. And until we start acknowledging that privilege and then shifting it and shifting privilege and power to people who need to speak, that's what I'm working on as an individual, but I don't know, collectively, I don't know that I have an answer.
And I think, so in my experience, at the University of Memphis, there has been such a movement in terms of our ability. So as a counselor educator, I work in the space of diversity and cultural sensitivity, and we train all of our students. But that's not the norm, right? This is a profession that chooses and that works in this space. But as a university, that is not something that up until very recently has really been super proactive in terms of that type of training for every single one of our employees and all of the people that we work with. Now that's higher education, right? This isn't in the school systems. This isn't something that's being taught at a very young age to all children across the Memphis community, right? Most of Memphis schools are still entirely segregated, right? Students are not learning the most fundamental things about inclusivity at an early age. They're learning it maybe as they get older, but at that point, you know, there's been so many experiences in the way that we shape and we experience the world. So by having programs that are in schools and in early education settings, and it could be in churches and it can be across the community, but by being able, not doing it at the tail end or as somebody is an adult, or, you know, integrating programs, you know, it needs to be from childhood. And I think that needs to be throughout the community.
Yeah, no, that's good. But that's good and that's true, because I had to come to the conclusion. I was invited to Crossville, Tennessee, for those who don't know, home of the Ku Klux Klan. And I did a training on ACEs, and I stood at the front of the room and I said, if you were in a home where your mother and father said, hate that nigga, first I asked the question, how many of y'all are Christian? Everybody raised their hand. Then I said, if you lived in a home where they said, hate that Negro, hang that Negro, you traumatized. Because how can good and love in a child live? So now they've been taught to love. They say they Christian love, but they hate the Negro, right? And so it's being started at home. And one lady came to me crying after that and said, my community, we witnessed my granddaddy kill a black man who was my friend child, but I grew up devaluing black folks because nobody did nothing about it. And so we know we live in a state that is, no doubt, a racist. Well, so what I say is I do celebrate the fact that we have some wins with this new election, but we as a state, as a community in Shelby County, got to know that DA seat and that judge seat, that this red state is watching it, because this is where they was getting those black kids $300 plus a year to lock them up in that prison. Now, if that's not going to happen, we're going to have to figure out how we do something different in this county, because we already seen what they did with the TANF dollars, holding it, saying for a rainy day, when we got people sleeping on our streets and people in poverty.
We're glad you're on the county.
And let me just start with a disclaimer. This is the opinion of one person, myself, and not the opinion of my esteemed institution or my esteemed state. But in answer directly to your question of how do we get white people to understand that they have a role in undoing the damage that is being done by this perpetuation of racism, I will tell you that from my perspective, it is that I am fully and authentically Black wherever I go, that I don't soft soap, I don't apologize, I don't introduce things in a way intended not to make you uncomfortable. That's not my job. And I won't do it. And I've got a few decades of life behind me that says, for me, it has been the best way that I have been able to engage my white colleagues around anything related to race, whether it was around healthcare or social justice or anything else. That's the only way I've made any headway as an individual in getting people to understand that I don't hate you because you're white. I despise the behavior of many white people towards Black people. That's not you individually, and it's not me individually. It's a mass problem that we all have a role in correcting. So for me, it's authenticity, it's pride, it's integrity, it's understanding that when I go to bed and wake up the next morning, I want to be able to look myself in the face and say, whatever I did, I remained, in the words of one of my heroes, Brian Stevenson, I remained proximate to an issue that I cared about, that impacted people that I care about, and that I am convinced I have a role in resolving, correcting, doing something about. And that guides me. That allows me to look anybody in the face, black or white, and say, that's not my problem. That's your problem. What I'm talking about is this.
Good.
Oh, I'm sorry, we have another question.
Yeah, just me. So I love panels because you learn so much about the panelists, but also it's inspiring too as well. But I am also a believer of showing up and showing out too as well. And so with that, with all of the things that you all have said, so thank you each and every one of you for everything that you contributed tonight. But how can individuals from the community support the work that you are doing? How can the community show up and show out so that way the voices are lifted up, so that way change does happen, so that way the dollars are allocated to the places that they need to be? I think that's very important to know and understand.
Well, obviously, vote for people like Charlie Caswell because he understands what needs to be done.
Yeah, I would say at that county commission meetings, many nights I sat there over the year, it's only a few people, right? They need to see your presence. They emails, they phones need to be blowed up that, hey, we got to do something different. The mayor, his email need to be blowed up because again, the people who want to do a development downtown, they're going to make sure either they're going to blow up his pockets. I ain't mean that. Not his pockets. I didn't say that. Blow up somebody's pockets. But I mean, it is what it is. And we got to get in their face because numbers count. And when they see that we are there and we're going to hold them accountable, change going to come.
Change will come. I think we are close to time to go. I think it has been a great conversation, but I hope and pray it does not stop at just a conversation. That's what happens too often. There's a conversation and nothing happens afterwards. So I think that's what you were asking. How do we keep this conversation going? So we're gonna lay that at the feet of the Community Foundation. Who came up with this for us to have this meeting. Give it up for this awesome panel. We're gonna take it.
Yes. Did you want to say something else?
No.
I'll speak. Okay, I'm gonna stand right here. Hi, y'all. I'm Sari. I serve on the Give 365 advisory committee. Thank you all so much for coming. Another hand for our amazing panelists. All of us heard a lot of really thoughtful, provoking information tonight. And I think what all of us can take away is that we all have a part in this. We in this room and in our community, all of us live in Memphis, live work in Shelby County in Memphis, and we are the ones who are responsible for protecting our communities. So thank you all for the work that you are doing. I also really wanted to recognize some of our Give 365 grantees from this year who have projects and work that are related to this theme of protecting communities. Could you stand up and wave your hand if you're in this room? Yay! Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And I really strongly recommend you come up, talk to the panelists, learn more about how you can support their work, also support the grantees who are here. All of them are listed on that phone board right back there. You can learn more about their work and other ways to support. And if you are not a member of Give 365 and want to be, you can talk to myself, you can talk to Ariel, any of the Community Foundation staff, and we would be very happy to get you signed up. Thank you all for coming.